Okay, today we are going to be reading The Truth the Dead Know. What you'll notice, I have in front of me the poem itself with my comments on the side, which are my initial impressions from my second or third reading. Remember, with poetry, it's always important to read the poem multiple times. I'm going to read the poem and go over my comments, and then we'll move into the diddles technique and how I used that structure in order to analyze the poem. For your homework, you'll be watching the video for The Truth the Dead Know, as well as all my pretty ones, and then you'll need to practice using diddles with the poem A Curse Against Elegies. The blank diddles form can be found in the Poetry School Fusion folder, as well as the Microsoft Word documents that I'm showing you right now on the screen. Don't forget to review and print the poetry terms, because that will be very important for you to use in order to analyze the poetry effectively. Let's read the poem first, The Truth the Dead Know. The Truth the Dead Know. For my mother, born March 1902, died March 1959, and my father, born February 1900, died June 1959. Gone, I say, and walk from church, refusing the stiff procession to the grave, letting the dead ride alone in the hearse. It is June. I am tired of being brave. We drive to the Cape. I cultivate myself where the sun gutters from the sky, where the sea swings in like an iron gate and we touch. In another country people die. My darling, the wind falls in like stones from the white-hearted water, and when we touch, we intertouch entirely. No one's alone. Men kill for this, or for as much. And what of the dead? They live without shoes in their stone boats. They are more like stones than sea would be if it stopped. They refuse to be blessed, throat, eye, and knuckle bone. All right, what you'll notice, this first stanza, if we want to call it, but really what we're noticing here is, due to this parallel structure of the poem, this sets up the poem as an elegy. And again, if you forgot what the term elegy is, you'll need to make sure you review that poetry term list. But an elegy is a poem of lament and loss, and we see the parallel structure which introduces the thematic aspect of death. The syntax is concise, it's factual. There are not any adjectives. This creates a cold and detached tone. It's unexpected because our speaker has just told us both of her parents have died within months of one another. We would expect a feeling of sadness or overwhelming despair, yet instead the facts are stated in a very succinct manner. When we move into the first true stanza of the poem here, what I noticed right away was the diction. Walk from church, refusing the stiff procession to the grave, letting the dead ride alone in the hearse. All of this is saying to me that she is angry. Now we start to see some emotion coming into play. The speaker is rebuffing God and religion in general. This is going to highlight her internal conflict that she's having with the death of her parents. She's having to reconcile her faith with the loss of her mother and father within such a short time frame of one another. The question, why is this happening, has to be pervading her thought process. It also is interesting to look at the fact that it is June. If we recall Foster, June is a month in spring, and spring is symbolic of rebirth. Yet, ironically, here we have our speaker attending the funeral of her father, and, a few months earlier, that of her mother. If we move into the third stanza, what stood out to me is the cape. This indicates the setting of the poem, and it also lets us know that perhaps our speaker is our poet herself. We don't want to assume that right away when we read a poem, but I think here Sexton is giving us some insight. Sexton was from the New England area, and is she referring to Cape Cod here? This stanza also has visual imagery. Sun gutters from the sky, sea swinging in like an iron gate, the use of the idea of touching. What I noticed here is that the number one, alliteration, which I don't have over here, but it's something that should be standing out to you for a sound device. Sun and sky and sea and swings. This creates a rhythm to the poetry here, and it also increases the pace at which we're reading. The simile used here, the sea swinging in like an iron gate. I thought this was somewhat ironic because typically when we think of water, again, we think of rebirth. But when it's being compared to swinging in like an iron gate, I believe what we have here is that thematic of aspect of death being built upon again, and that death is permanent, that it cannot be escaped. You also might think, does this mean or does this have an allusion to heaven? And is this building upon that religious concept that's also been developed? And so therefore, you might be thinking two different directions. And as you move into the Diddles chart, it'll help you determine your analysis. When we move into the fourth stanza, some things that stood out to me was right away the term "my darling." Number one, we don't know who our speaker is referring to, and this comes back up to the pronoun use of we as well. Who's driving to the Cape with the speaker? Who is my darling? These are some things that are unanswered and will come into play with our Diddles chart. I thought the use of my darling was somewhat sarcastic, and I also felt that it was her criticizing this internal conflict that she was facing. We see visual and tactile imagery with the repetition of the use of the word touch, white-hearted water, the simile of wind falling in like stones, and the imagery from the previous stanza, I think, are going back to that contrast of what we assume as to be comforting actually being something that is harsh. We think of water as acting as a way to cleanse us, yet here we're seeing that she's struggling for that renewal and that rebirth. And this is a typical conflict that one faces with the loss of their parents. What I also wanted to point out here, which is coming down into the comment for H8, is that we see the simple syntax ending the stanza again, and this is happening throughout. Each stanza, if you notice, I am tired of being brave. In another country people die. Men kill for this or for as much. They refuse to be blessed, throat, eye, and knuckle bone. She uses simple syntax to end each of her stanzas, and I think that's something that you'll want to come back to with the Diddles chart. In our final stanza, she begins it with a rhetorical question, and I think this indicates the tone shift. What we had seen previously was a tone of anger, mixed somewhat with detachment, but definitely anger towards the loss of her parents. And now we feel envious. Here we start to see what the dead have that we don't. And yet, even though we're envy, there's still the melancholy there. The speaker desires the freedom that death provides. I think we can also look and see that we have some oxymoron here, stone boats, again contributing to the thematic aspect of death, and that death is permanent, that we cannot escape it, and that fate for many is difficult. Our mortality is a difficult concept to deal with. And finally, the one aspect, again, diction, that stood out to me, the word blessed, going back to that thematic aspect of religion. Sexton says they refuse to be blessed. So once again, we have the repetition of the word refuse in association with religious diction. Sexton is creating a critical tone towards God and religion, which, as you read Sexton, you will see that that's a overarching concept developed throughout her poetry in this collection. I'm going to pause there, and what I would like for you to do is get out the Diddles chart for this poem and open the next video to view, in which I'll explain how to complete the Diddles chart for the poem The Truth the Dead Know. Thank you.